Welcome. Welcome to Sipping Tea with Sabrina. And I have allergies, y'all. So I am going to be sipping. I'm always sipping, but this is real gulps. So in just a second, we'll be sharing the tea on nonprofit financial health. It's a nonprofit financial health check. Is your organization built for long term impact? But if you've never met me before, I'm Sabrina, the Dream Team Architect and President and CEO of Building Better Boards. I specialize in building elite leadership teams for corporate and nonprofit boards and CEOs, turning high level potential into extraordinary performance. And if you're looking to transform your board or need support working with your board or team, you've come to the right place. I'm Sabrina Walker Hernandez, facilitator for corporate and nonprofit organizations, international keynote speaker, and your go to expert in strategic leadership and governance excellence. I've helped raise $36 million in revenue while building organizational resilience. And I'm here to share the insights and strategies that can make a real difference for you and your organization. So we're going to get started. Now, I am going to say to you that finance is not my strong suit. So I'm so happy to bring to the stage Jason Kruger. And Jason, can you give the people a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much, Sabrina. I really appreciate being on your podcast. My background is currently a partner at Citrin Cooperman, and Citrin Cooperman is a national public accounting firm. I think we're about in the top 15 to 20 nationally as far as size. So our firm provides audit, tax support, and other what we call advisory services. So my background is in audit. I started the first 10 years of my career in audit, most of that with Deloitte, which is in the one of the big four accounting firms. Then I switched over and I started a company called Signature Analytics that supports companies and organizations, nonprofit organizations, in the small, mid-sized business community. So think of 5 million to up to maybe 100 million in revenue or in revenue size organizations, and we work with them to support what I call financial and accounting leadership. And so on the sorry for a second. We help with them on financial and accounting leadership so that we can really provide value in how they look at their numbers, the information that they're able to obtain from their financial statements to be able to make decisions to achieve the missions or the goals of their organization. We fill in the gaps where there's needed to be, where they might have gaps. But what we see a lot of times in the nonprofit space is the lack of strong leadership in the financial and accounting side, which includes communications with the board, making sure that, even the simple things of monthly, ensuring monthly financial statements are in place, getting assessed. Excited to talk about with you today.
Good. I'm so excited because, I was a CEO who sat in that seat for 20 years, and I can tell you that that part was not my strongest suit. And I had to have a lot of help from board members and from my CFO, who really, really helped me. So I have a couple of questions here. I am battling allergies, so I do sip my tea doing this. So I have a couple of questions here for you, Jason.
Sure.
But again, I want to say, with your breadth of experience, thank you for being here. We're going to focus this conversation, or try to, on nonprofit financial health check. Is your organization built for long-term impact? And so I have a set of questions here. And one of them is, what are the most common financial blind spots you see nonprofit organizations make? Or what are the most common financial blind spots you see in nonprofit organizations?
Yeah, so I see there's several. So from a day-to-day perspective, as we all know, cash is king. Understanding the cash flows of your organization and the expectations of cash. So with nonprofits, you have donors, you have you have a combination of donors, you have potentially you have capital campaigns, you have maybe a large annual gala or event that pulls in contributions and so forth. And you also may have government or funding or some level of grants. And so really understanding the cash flows of the organization throughout the year is very important, because based on the timing of cash really determines how you can implement your mission throughout the year. So that's the first step, is making sure you have an understanding of your cash flow so that you're able to effectively spend and incur the cost to ensure that your mission is in place. The other thing that I find is that the budgeting process for every company, but especially for nonprofits, is critical. And having a solid process to build the annual budget in advance before the fiscal year starts, not after it starts, is critical.
And not during it.
Ensuring that you build that budget from the ground up, working with the program. Yeah, not during it, exactly. So working with your program managers to ensure and understand the different programs within the organization is critical. You have commitments from certain donors. Can we rely on that? Do we need some sort of reserve just in case that we're not going to receive the full amounts? You may have grants again. And when we talk about grants and cash flows, some grants are cost reimbursement. So you have to incur the cost and then you get reimbursed on the back end. And that makes things tricky from a cash flow perspective as well, and being able to truly manage the organization. And then the third and probably what is just as most important, which I know you speak a lot about, is the collaboration with the board, and having a sophisticated board that you can bounce ideas off of, that you can really provide clarity into the financial health of the organization. The board members are there to help. You should surround yourself with board members that have certain levels of sophistication in various aspects of business in general and in the nonprofit community. And so being able to surround yourself and have to have a solid, very tight relationship, and really not leveraging them to the fullest potential of the organization.
Perfect answer. So, guys, we are live streaming. Jason, I want to let you know that we might have what do you call that? A delay on your end. If you could check your internet strength, that would be great. Because I don't want anybody to miss what you're saying, because we get a little lag in. I'm like, oh no, they need to know they need to have an operating budget. They need to know they need to have a board member that help, and a process for the operating budget. So I don't want any of this missed. Again, like I said, I struggle with this. I know there's people out there struggling with this. I saw a post just the other day that said something about if you have to borrow, they used a low number. If you have to borrow like $1,000 for your nonprofit, then you're not in a good, healthy spot. Something like that. And I was like, oh my God, that's so true. So here's a question. How can leaders quickly assess the financial health of their nonprofit?
Yeah, I think, again, from the first step is, as I talked about, is really understanding the cash flows of the organization and the timing of cash throughout the year. So if you have an understanding of that's critical. and being able to forecast that out. The industry standard is 13-week cash flow. So really having visibility into the organization over the next 13 weeks, understanding the inflows and the outflows of cash is critical. And as I mentioned before, if you have grants, some of those grants may be cost reimbursement. So you have to front the cash up front before you then ultimately have to submit and fill out the paperwork and compliance to be able to receive the funding. And so having an understanding of that is critical. The three main, the main statements associated with a nonprofit organization is a statement of financial position, which for a for-profit company is the balance sheet. Then you have the statement of activities, which is the income statement for a for-profit organization. And then you have a cash flow statement of functional expenses. What I always stress is a lot of organizations, business owners, even for-profit, they look at the income statement and they say, hey, or they look at the statement of activities and they say, well, I just make sure I understand the statement of activities. I don't really understand the statement of financial position, which is effectively the balance sheet. And the reality is, for the financial health of an organization, if you really want to understand the financial health of an organization, understanding the statement of financial position is critical. That will give you an understanding of what your expected receivables might be, what the timing of contributions or expectations that you might have from grants or donors that you might have submitted for but not yet received payment. It will give you an understanding of what your liabilities are, your payables are, and it will really allow you to manage the business and ultimately the cash flows of the organization. So from a short-term health perspective, understanding the statement of financial position is critical. Understanding the overall cash flows is critical as well. From a long-term position, I know we're going to talk about this in a little bit, having some level or understanding of financial reserves is critical as well. And I always talk about, we always talk about, even though we're a nonprofit, doesn't mean no profit. It doesn't mean we operate on a net zero bottom line. We have to run this. What I've seen successful organizations. I'm sorry.
As a business, we have to run it.
Exactly. Successful organizations have to look at it as running it as a business, looking to grow. If you want to grow your organization, you have to build in financial reserves to be able to reinvest back into the organization to grow. And if you're running your business on a net zero perspective, there's no funds left over to really reinvest back into the business, which is why you see a lot of nonprofits with infrastructures that are, straight out of the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, because they haven't prioritized the infrastructure and the necessary investments to continue to compete in a very competitive nonprofit space.
Yeah. So Jason, I'm sorry, I got kind of interject. I get excited. When people say the words that I know are the truth, like you have started a business, you are running a business, treat it as such. And so I get very excited and I just jump in there. So thank you for saying that. I completely 1000% agree with you. So what are some of those key indicators that nonprofits should monitor regularly to ensure long-term sustainability?
Yeah, I think a lot of that really depends on the organization and how they drive, I'll call it revenue or donations or grants or contributions. So depending on how they do that is important. And then also, I think really it starts with, as we talked about, the budgeting process. So when we put together a budget, we need to understand the levers that we can pull or adjust based on what's happening within the organization during the year, and we need to be able to do some scenario planning as well. We more recently, obviously, there's been a lot of uncertainty in the nonprofit world because of government. Any nonprofit that takes government funding, there's been a lot of concern and uncertainty because maybe there was some commitments from the government in the past that are not, obviously not being lived up to, or there's uncertainty about the renewals of certain commitments or grants that they were achieving before. So having understanding different scenarios of what levers can you pull, and having that in place at the beginning of the fiscal year when you are planning for the upcoming year. I call it what is it, a good, better, great, or something, or a bad, you have a down. If we lose certain funding, okay, how do we pivot? If things go as planned, okay, we're here. And if we get, additional funding, how do we reinvest that, or how do we continue to achieve our mission and our goals of our organization? So one of the, what's critical, I think, is really understanding the different, when you're going through the budgeting process, planning for potential future events is critical. And then just in general, reinvesting back into your organization in different platforms. So donor management systems are critical. I've seen if you implement a donor management system effectively, it can drive revenue or contributions from donors at a much higher percentage than you were doing in the past. It more than pays for itself, and it allows you to better track what your the movement and the donors more effectively, to be more effective in the future as well. So those are things that are I think are critical when you're looking at the future and looking at your organization.
Yeah, I am like totally trying to sit on my hands and not interject. Again, agree. Like, it's amazing to me how many organizations, even some that are, multi-million dollar organizations, they don't use their budget as the proper tool,
Yeah.
and it's just amazing to me that that happens. So I'm so happy that you're saying this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
everything
and
starts with the budget. For nonprofits, everything starts with the budget. So a thorough budgeting process is critical. And the nonprofits that are successful go through that process, and it takes them several months to get through
yeah.
that. And they need to be doing that before the fiscal year starts, obviously.
Yes. I remember, well, with my organization, because we had someone that was much like yourself, who helped guide this, we would start budget process in May, and our fiscal year started in October. So we were working on it, going back and forth, looking at the numbers and the data, to get the best projections based on our
Mhm.
history and all of that. So I cannot stress that this is important. And even a startup board that I'm on, the first year is, and now you can correct me when I'm wrong, Jason, because you're the professional. But the first year you're a startup, it's a guesstimation. You really don't have any
Absolutely. Yeah.
data to go by. But year
Yeah.
three, you got some data, and you just keep moving forward with it. So I think
Yep.
people make it more complicated in their head than it really is, or they don't want to be confined by the budget. Not sure.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah,
So
I call it, it's version 1.0, and then you continue to improve off of that. And it's the same thing with, the monthly financial statements. So what I failed to mention last time is it's critical to have a process to produce monthly financial statements or information that can be reviewed at management level, but also can provide clarity and visibility to program managers, and then ultimately the board. And so having that clarity and that process and consistency is important. And it's not like you have to have, Fortune 500 financials on day one. It's a process, like you said, Sabrina, which is, let's start with version 1.0. Okay, great. What do we want to, what do we like about it? What do we not like about it? What else do we need to see? What better visibility do we need into the organization? And let's implement those next month. And then we do the same thing. We continue to improve it over time, taking feedback from the different parts of the organization and the board on how we should be presenting and looking at our financials.
yeah. So you had alluded to, you said the word reserve. So how do you recommend nonprofit balance mission-driven spending with the need for financial reserves?
Yeah, I think it's this is something that should be, we talk about the tone from the top or a culture or of an organization. If the culture of the and of the organization and if the mission is growth, there has to be then we have to be talking about this throughout the organization. Has to be led by management, has to be led by the board. And so when we're putting together the budget, we need to be talking about what it means to grow and what level of reserves we need to support that growth. There is so when you have growth as an organization or as a for-profit company, there's two things. You need to invest to obtain that growth. You can't just you may get revenue growth, but if you don't have the infrastructure to support that, you can't do anything with it, and you're not achieving the mission of your organization. So if we're planning for growth, what is the infrastructure we need to build? What is the investment? And some of that could be back office investments in things like even things like HR, accounting, program managers, infrastructure, technology, those types of things that are, some would say are not specifically allocated to the mission of the organization, but they're critical investments to allow, and a sophisticated board will know that you have to invest in these things to achieve growth and sustainability that you're looking for long term. So getting alignment with the board on, yes, we might be able to grow revenues, but what does that mean? And how do we reinvest that in the infrastructure? And then how do we reinvest that, to support and to grow the organization in the long term? And so the only way to do that, it's a combination of ensuring you have a sufficient financial reserves, but you also have, and that then ties into the ongoing cash flows of the organization. So as a company, the larger you are, the more cash you need just for day-to-day operations. So you may have now a higher reserve, or may have more cash, but you need that cash just to survive day to day. So it's not only like if you're growing, do you need to produce more cash? You need to produce more reserves on top of that to continue to sustain that growth. And that's where we see a lot of challenges is, organizations that grow top line, they don't have a good plan. They're spending the money as fast as they're bringing it in, and they haven't invested in the infrastructure of their organization or their people effectively, and they're really not able to achieve the mission as effectively, at 20 million or 30 million or 40 million as they were at 10 million, because they haven't invested appropriately into their organization. And what ends up happening is then you ultimately can lose credibility with donors, the board, and others within the community, and it can have a long-term impact on your organization.
Yes, because nobody wants to invest in something that's not successful. People like success. And so you have
Right.
to figure that out.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's just like looking at it like a for-profit, like we
yeah.
talked about. Think of your donors as investors. I mean, they're
Mhm.
investing in the success of your mission. And if you don't have, your stuff together, and you can't produce good financials, and you don't have good infrastructure, and you're out of, you look like you're unsophisticated, you're not going to, individuals, people, organizations, companies are not going to want to invest in your organization. They're going to find somebody, another organization to invest in.
Yeah. And I love talking to members people because a lot of us, I'll say us, we tend to be heart people. And heart is great. That's why we got into this. But if you want that long term and that financial reserve, you've got to look at the numbers. It is a
Yeah.
business. And so I'm going to ask a question. Well, I'm going to share something that always rang in my head that was like a goal for my organization. And I don't know if it's still true, but it was something that was shared with me many years ago. And I want you to weigh in on it. So I was told that at minimum, you needed 90 days of cash reserves at
Mhm.
minimum. And then it turned into no, you need 180 days of cash reserve. Is there a magic number on cash reserve?
I don't think there's a magic number. I think it depends again on the mission and the goals that you have for your organization, whether it's if it's fast growth or if you're looking, just looking at staying at the same level in
Mhm,
perpetuity.
mhm,
The more growth that you're looking for, I think the more cash reserves need to be built up because you're always having to dip into that. And so
mhm.
always looking at, again, the cash flows of the organization. And the 90-day mark is that lines up with what I was talking about before, the 13-week cash flow and
Okay,
having visibility. 13 weeks is basically 1/4 of the year. 90
okay,
days is roughly a quarter of the year. And
got it.
so having that future visibility into the cash flows of the organization is critical. And also, when you're putting together the annual budgeting process, what does that cash flow look from an annual perspective? So there's no magic number. It really depends on the goals of the organization and the missions of the organization and what you're looking to accomplish. As I mentioned before, if you're looking for fast growth versus if you're looking to just maintain, the goals and the cash flow needs are going to be different as far as what your reserves might be. But I would say yes, if you are living payroll to payroll, that is a very scary situation to be in because one donor check doesn't come in and all of a sudden you're scraping to find cash to be able to make payroll. And so at a minimum, I do agree 3 months worth of operating cash is critical, and that gives you some ability to be able to plan if things do happen. With I still remember back in COVID, and even now with the uncertainty in government funding, the organizations that have some sort of reserve can say, okay, this is a bad thing that's happening. Let's sit down. We have some reserve. We can think about, let's make sure we plan and scenario plan on what things we can do. We know we can make payroll next week. We know we can make payroll next month,
Right.
but we're going to have to make some changes based on the changes in the environment, but we have time to do that. And so, the 90 days would be minimum. That allows you at least a couple months to figure out how to adjust. If you're at 30 days or less, you're kind of at the mercy of whatever may happen.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for shining on more light on that. Hey, if you're just joining us, welcome to the broadcast. We're currently talking about nonprofit financial health check. Is your organization built for long-term impact? And then we've covered budget, we covered financial reserves, we've covered long-term sustainability. If you're just joining us, I promise you it is worth the time to go back and listen to this again. It is some great insight from Jason, and I really encourage it. I got excited, y'all, because I'm like clapping back here. Else who says that your nonprofit is a business and treat it as such. So, Jason, with that in mind, what are some practical first steps for organizations looking to strengthen their financial foundation?
Yeah, I can't stress this enough, and sometimes it gets overlooked, but having a good process uh, to manage the day-to-day accounting and ultimately close the books consistently, monthly, and produce monthly financial information that management can review and then ultimately can collaborate with the board on. It sounds simple, it sounds obvious. Every company, every organization should close their books every month and have a financial reporting package. But I will tell you that it can be very rare, and also it can be not timely, it cannot be accurate. And so having the sophistication within the accounting and finance function of an organization is critical to give you the visibility to be able to operate the organization and make decisions. So from a foundational and practical perspective, having a good process to ensure that you have a process to pay bills, invoice if you do invoice, manage cash flow, and then a good process to close the books every month and produce monthly financial information. At a minimum, you're producing the basic financials, but then as you get more mature, you can start to break out different aspects of the financials so that maybe each of the programs or program managers can get their own set of financials or information to be able to run their programs more effectively. But being able to get financial information quickly and reliably is critical. And that takes somebody that's where you have that accounting and financial leadership that's driving that can communicate that to the management team, and then ultimately provide credibility for management to the board. So anything that goes to the board, we don't want to just hit print on QuickBooks and send it to the board. We want to give them a nice package, give them credibility, also to potential donors. So just that process of and getting in that routine of closing the books, having reliability on the financials, building that out gives credibility throughout the organization, but it also allows you to make better decisions. And so it sounds simple. It sounds like everybody should do it, but it's not common, especially in the nonprofit space. I find that accounting and finances in a lot of cases is looked at as a necessary evil and not a value add. And you have to change that mindset from necessary evil to value add to the organization that will allow you to move the organization forward and achieve the mission that you're looking to achieve. And looking at it from an investment perspective, donors want to see that you are investing in these types of things. And I know sometimes we're torn between, well, it has to all go to programs.
Right.
Well, yes, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we're not completely forgetting about the other things that are important.
Correct. I again 1,000% agree with you. I will say this from the seat that I sat in and continue to sit in as board members. Like you said, it's going to evolve. It's going to change. When I was in my organization, I had a partnership with our city, and so our city managed our finances. Now I've been retired from the organization for over 8 years, and they have an in-house CFO. And so the organizations change. With the startup board that I'm on, we intentionally recruited someone with that background, and they take care of that. With the museum board that I'm on, and we get a monthly report, just like you said, he talks about it. With the museum board that I serve on, they have an in-house CFO. We have like 2 board members that assist, and their presentations, sometimes I'm like, I don't even understand it, but I understand the bottom line of the numbers, but they give graphs and they give this. So the point is, it's being talked about.
Yeah.
And it's a process. And so it makes me feel comfortable as a board member to go out and advocate for the organization. But I understand others. So how can nonprofits really communicate financial health and transparency to donors and stakeholders like board members?
Yeah. Well, one, I would say make sure you invest in the right people within your finance and accounting, within the finance and accounting function of your organization. What we see is, again, what I mentioned before is organizations get caught up on it. All has to go to programs. We have to meet the expectations of percentages associated with programs and XYZ. That's true, but you also have to, if we can really break it down, the investment in the finance, accounting, or back office function should be around a minimum 3% of top line revenue. We see organizations at closer to 1%, and that is a recipe for you're going to have some challenges with managing cash flow, managing just the communications with the board. So if you're a $10 million organization, you should be investing $300,000 a year in the back office, finance, accounting. Maybe some of that covers some HR as well. $300,000 a year sounds like a lot, but it's not that much for a $10 million organization and the value that it can drive to that organization. We see organizations at 10 million investing $100,000 or less, and they are they are struggling. And so that's the first thing to mention. As far as how nonprofits can communicate financial health and transparency to donors and stakeholders, I think it really comes down to making sure you have the right foundation, the right people, the right leadership, establishing the right processes to close the books and produce monthly financials internally, so you have good habits. Start building out an ongoing monthly financial package that management reviews, and then start building and communicating with the board either on a monthly or quarterly basis at a minimum. So there's a monthly board package as well. So those are all the internal things that establish the foundation for credibility for external parties. Once you have that foundation in place internally, you can leverage the reporting and the financial information to start to build out reporting and information for external parties like donors and stakeholders. And then, as most organizations, when you get to over, depending on the state, over 1 million to 3 million, they're required to have audited financials.
Yep.
And so having strong audited financial statements that you can provide to donors, that gives them more credibility, even more credibility, that's also important. So again, it starts with the foundation of and habits of running a solid organization internally, and taking that information and then having that at your fingertips, so that when you do have donors or stakeholders asking questions about your organization, you understand the financial information and you can speak to that. And being able to speak to the financial side of the organization gives you the credibility above and beyond, I'd say, anything else to a donor that wants to invest or give you money, give funds to your organization. And I think, to be honest, beyond the mission, beyond the mission, donors are looking for how effectively is this organization going to spend my money? And if they don't have confidence in the financial side of the organization, they're not going to want to invest in it.
Exactly. And I think a lot of times people miss that point. So thank you so much. They think, well, it's heart, and heart is great, but I want to know I'm investing in something that's going to be around for a while. And so and that goes back to planning. You said planning a couple of times throughout our conversation. So just again, what role does financial planning play in preparing for economic uncertainty or funding gaps? You've said it, but I think this is
I think I jumped the gun a little bit on this question.
Because of where we're at, I think it's worth stating again, because it's uncertainty and people are experiencing these funding gaps.
Yeah. Ideally, it starts with the budgeting process. So the budgeting process is at one point in time. So you have a budget, but then what even more sophisticated organizations do is they look at that budget and they say, okay, now let's talk about different scenarios and scenario planning. And if you can do that in advance, you can say, okay, well, if we don't get this level of funding, or if we don't get this grant, or this grant gets pulled back, or this bigger donor pulls back, what are the levers that we can pull to adjust throughout the year? So there's a combination of scenario planning in advance, ensuring that you have the reserves in place that we talked about before, that gives you the time to pivot within your organization, is also critical. And so I'd say, again, uncertainty, it's all about the financials. So having a process to produce monthly financials in a format that you understand and can make decisions off of is critical. Being prepared through different scenario planning in advance, if things happen differently, managing against the budget every month is critical. So looking at the budget, where are we this month? How are our actuals compared to our budget? How are we during the year to date so far compared to our budget? Do we need to make decisions based off of that? Just because we have a budget doesn't mean that we can spend all the money in the budget if we're not bringing in the revenue.
Exactly.
Right? And so individuals within the organization need to understand that. Program managers need to understand that. It's it needs to be communicated from the top that, yes, this is our budget, but it doesn't mean that I just automatically get to spend it, because we need to make sure we have the funds. And so it's continuous collaboration within the organization and the leveraging of the board to support the decisions that you're making as well.
I have a question that we didn't discuss, but I want to know your opinion on it. This was a driving factor for me in our budgeting process. Again, so I learned that went to a conference and someone said no more than 20%. They said healthy organization, in a healthy organization, no more than 20% of your budget relies on one source. That is a
Mhm.
golden statement that I carry with me for my organization's budget, and we manage towards that. What is
Yep.
your opinion on that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's the same thing for-profit companies. We talk about client concentration, right? So the value of an overall organization or a business, if you have 90% of your revenue coming from three sources, there's high risk. It's high risk, and so people don't. If you're a for-profit business, investors devalue that business. They don't want to invest. They don't have the appetite to invest in it because there's much higher risk. If you lose one of those clients, the value of the company goes down significantly. In a nonprofit organization, it's the same thing. It's, if you're fully reliant on one or two sources, that is high risk. And everything that we look at from a financial side or running a business is all risk-based. So we want to make sure we understand the risks associated with the organization, and how we eliminate those risks. 20%, I would say, is probably a good marker. Now, you're not going to turn down a huge gift if somebody's going to give it to you, but that doesn't create long-term sustainability. So if it's a one-time deal, great. If it's helping you to achieve your goals to get to that next level, great. But there has to be a plan to diversify over a longer period of time, because that ultimately is not sustainable, likely not sustainable, and creates huge risk in the organization if that goes away.
Yeah, and for me right now, when you talk about economic uncertainty, I see a lot of nonprofits that were more than 20%. I had a client that was like 30% federal, and they
Yeah.
don't know if their doors are going to be open because the board was okay with that, thinking that funding was going to be forever, thinking it would never happen, that the funding
Mhm.
would get canceled. And now they're in the position, but they had
Yeah.
stopped planning and they had stopped fundraising and had become reliant. So
Yeah.
if you were in the boardroom and you sat on that board or were invited to present to that board, what would you say?
I'd say we have to diversify.
Yeah.
um, and that, again, it comes down to the missions of the organization. I think anybody that becomes complacent, that's where you lose your edge in the market,
Yeah.
right? So you hear the term, you're either growing or you're declining. You're not staying the same. And if you're trying to stay the same, then you're actually declining. You're declining your market share, you're declining your revenue, and it's not going to be sustainable over time. So complacency can be the death of an organization. And if you're complacent, and if management is complacent, maybe it's time to look for new leadership or some sort of infusion to talk about, okay, how do we continue to move this forward and build the excitement around the organization that we become complacent about.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So, can you share a success story where a nonprofit turned around its financial health and what made the difference?
Yeah, this is the best one I have is it's actually an organization in Los Angeles, and that organization that we worked with, and they're fairly prominent organization, or known in the community, and they have a very high level board of directors are very high level individuals within the community. And I think it was a combination of the board took their eye off the ball a little bit. The organization and leadership needed a change because the leadership was not able to continue for a variety of reasons, including health, operating the organization in the way that they were before. They were having significant challenges getting through their audit, the financial statement audit. They were 1 or 2 or at least 2 years behind on that. So compliance was an issue. The books and records were a disaster. They weren't, even paying some basic bills. They had no processes to pay their basic bills. And it became a pretty big issue. We were referred in by their CPA who was doing their audit, who basically said, hey, we can't do the audit because their books are a mess. So we get there, and one of my team members got there, and the first or second day he was there, the lights went out. And it was because they didn't pay their electric bill.
Yeah.
So not only was he, there to kind of organize and figure out what's going on from the financial side of things and the processes, but he was on the phone with the electric company trying to get the lights turned back on and the bill paid so they could get the lights turned back on. And that's how dire it was. Wow. And so we came in there and you talk about the shoe boxes and receipts and IOUs everywhere and those types of things. And this organization was, I would say less than 2 months from completely folding and falling apart. Mm-hmm. And the board finally caught wind of what was going on and was obviously very concerned. There was reputational damage that was, potentially in play here as well, because it would have appeared that the board dropped the ball. Right. On the situation. And so we were able to come in and step one in these situations for me always is, okay, we know we have a dire situation. So number one is let's understand cash flow. So do we understand the cash flows of your organization so we can pay the bills, keep the lights on, literally keep the lights on, and make payroll. Mm-hmm. And for that next payroll. So that's number one. And then from there, can we forecast the cash flows of the organization over the next month and then ultimately the next 90 days? And is there a process to bring in cash and to make sure we're meeting our commitments on external, payments as well? So that's number one. So we got that in place, and we're able to manage the cash of the business, the ins and outs of the cash of the business to keep the lights on and keep things going. Number two is how do we get the financial information and the financial records caught up to current status, or at least at a point to where they can move forward with the audited financials. So the process, what is the process to get the financials caught up to current status, which is we're able to do over a period of time. And then once we have that in place, how do we implement processes from a day-to-day perspective so that the existing team understands their roles and responsibilities, they have the right oversight, they're getting the right oversight and support to be successful. And then ultimately there's a process to close the books every month and produce monthly financials. And so we were able to do this. And this was a pretty dire process, but it took 6 to 9 months. But within that time period, we took them from the most challenging client that this CPA firm had to a model citizen and one of their best clients. We transformed the financial health of the organization. We gave better visibility to the board and to management. And this was 7 or 8 years ago. They're still a client of ours. They look at us as, they continuously still tell us that we saved their organization because of the situation that they were in. So they're indebted to us just with their gratitude. And we've just performed some fantastic things there. And now what we're doing is we're actually, now that you have the basic foundational things in order, you can start to talk about the fun stuff. You can start to talk about the future. You can start to build out better financial reporting and modeling to start talking about how we can grow the organization beyond where we're at now
Right.
and achieve more sustainable health and longevity for the organization. And that's what we're able to do. And so we do that by basically providing that leadership, filling in the gaps. It's fractional accounting. You can call it outsourced accounting, and leveraging and working with their existing team members who were in over their heads. They were overwhelmed. They just didn't have the right team in place. And so that was a huge success for us that we continue to, have a great relationship with.
Wow. Thank you for that, because that would have been one organization that's not providing their service to a community that needs it. And I see it happen too often, all the time. So that is good. And so I know that was my last question, but I got one more because I just want people to understand. When you say fractional CFO, again, just explain it to people what fractional CFO is.
Yeah, it means it's an individual that can support and be part of your team, but isn't there every day, isn't on payroll. You're not paying for a full-time CFO. You're not paying for a full-time controller. And what we like to do is provide that leadership at a fraction of the cost. You don't, at most organizations, they don't need a full-time CFO. And if or the organization thinks that the CFO is also doing bank recs, closing the books, etc. A true CFO should be on the strategic side of things, and a true CFO is going to cost, well over $200,000 a year, which many organizations, don't necessarily need to be incurring that cost, and don't need somebody there 40 hours a week doing that. Same thing with a controller. They need somebody that can provide the leadership for their team, install the processes, make sure the books are closed, produce reporting. But the controller doesn't need to be doing bank recs. And so we can oversee the individuals and the team that does the lower level responsibilities, push work down to them, make sure that you have the processes in place. So you have you're getting the full value of a complete accounting and finance function at a cost point that makes sense for your organization.
Perfect. Thank you. My Lord, we're running out of time, but I do have a question here from Andrea. Andrea has a question. If a donor gives a significant donation for a vehicle, perhaps $20,000, but your org only bought in $50,000 that same year, if you purchase the vehicle, does that actually have a negative impact on the organization?
So let's say that again. So if an organization, if a donor gives $20,000 for a vehicle to purchase a vehicle.
No, so if the donor gives a significant donation, yes, for a vehicle, you're exactly right. Perhaps 20,000, but your org only bought in 50 that same year.
Yep.
If you purchase the vehicle, does that actually have a negative impact on the organization?
I don't think so. I mean, if the donor is giving the funds directly as for the purposes of a vehicle, those are what we call restricted contributions, meaning they restricted those funds for a vehicle, meaning you can't use those funds for any other reason, if that's the purpose and they specifically identified that as such. And so you can either, in that case, you can either buy the vehicle with those funds, or you can decline the funds and not buy the vehicle. So if you need the vehicle and someone's willing to give you the funds for it, you can do that. If a person says, hey, you know what, here's 20 grand, you can use it to buy the vehicle, or you can use it for whatever else you might need to use it for, then I would relook at what's the best use of those funds for the organization, and use those funds accordingly. But if a person designates, if you're a nonprofit and a donor designates funds for a specific reason, you are bound by that designation, and you cannot use those funds in any other way.
Yeah. And so she added here, and we're out of time, but this is too good. And I want to hear what you have to say. She said, thank you. I didn't know how it would look regarding percentage that you mentioned as far as admin costs. That, I have something I want to say, but I don't want to jump in before you say what you have to say.
It really doesn't, it doesn't matter. Obviously the percentages are going to be out of whack, but it is a smaller organization. And it can be easily explained, I believe, to outside parties that, hey, we received a gift for a new vehicle and we accepted it, and it's going to allow us to achieve our mission in the future. And it's something that can be a positive communication with third parties versus a negative that, hey, you're not spending the money on you're not spending all your donations on your mission.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, immediately, and Jason, you can correct me, immediately my mind went to, why are you automatically assuming a vehicle is admin costs? I just happen to know about her organization. Because in my head, it's like, I know what those scars, what her organization is. You're probably going to transport patients. You're probably going to deliver items to the hospital. That's
those are program costs.
Those are program costs. Exactly. And I think people immediately go, oh, it's a vehicle, so it has to be admin costs. No.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
Jason, we're over time. I'm so excited about this conversation. I want to thank you for joining us on this stage. I want to offer you the opportunity to make any last comments, and not only that, share with the people how they can get in contact with you if they need to.
Sure. Yeah, I love talking to business owners, nonprofit leaders, organizations. Anyone can reach out at any time. I'm easily found on LinkedIn, Jason Kruger, Citrin Cooperman, and then I can be reached via email anytime. The letter J, Kruger, that's Kruger @citrincooperman.com. Citrin is with a C, so CITRIN, Cooperman.com. And I'd love to talk to anybody who wants to reach out.
Perfect. And that is Sipping Tea with Sabrina. We will see you next time. Bye, guys.